I apologize, I was muted. Thank you, Cara, and thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. I'm very excited to share with you one of the collaborative research that I have done with myself, with Rory Coulter and also Daisy Van Court on volunteering and mental well-being with a 10-year follow-up. So what is volunteering? Now, volunteering is defined as individuals providing their time and their labor voluntarily to support community. So there are so many different, wide-ranging activities that can be considered as volunteer. For example, neighborhood support, animal shelter, voting registration, and also donations. Now, these activities can be actioned at various levels, at individual, community, regional, national, and also even global levels, and have been considered as an important asset for individual and community well-being. Now, currently, there are over 1 billion volunteers all over the world. And particularly in the UK, we have 20 million volunteers. And this large scale was continued to be seen during the COVID-19 pandemic, where in the first few months of the outbreak, we had over 1 million people registered to volunteer. And also we had over 3,000 mutual aid groups in the UK to support people in the community during the outbreak. And it's so wonderful to see how many people are willing to put forward themselves to help and support the community. Now, previous studies have shown that volunteering helps support and improve mental, social, and physical well-being. For example, a report of over 10,000 participants commissioned by the National Council for Voluntary Organizations shows that the majority of volunteers felt happy and well supported and recognized and belonged. They also reported of feeling the engagement had improved their mental health and reducing their loneliness and depressions. Researchers also found that volunteering helps expand people's social networks, offering opportunities to meet new people, enhance social bonding and connectedness, and also helps improve social capital. So like people more likely to trust their neighbors, and they have stronger personal relationships with their friends, family, and neighborhoods as well. It also helps improve people's social and employable skills. And finally, volunteering is also associated with better physical well-being, including decreases in functional decline, cortisol reactivity to stresses, and also cardiovascular risk. And volunteering can also help increase our physical activity, particularly if your volunteer activity involves delivering, and also it helps reduce the sedentary behaviors, and also improve strength and well-being and walking speed. And many of these impacts were found in both experimental and observational studies, and suggesting that the association may be causal. Now, because of the social and health impacts, it has been estimated that volunteerism contributed around 15 billion to the UK economy. However, there has been some research suggesting that these benefits may be stronger amongst older adults. For example, the bar chart here is from a survey conducted in Scotland, shows that mental health appears to be better for older volunteers aged between 55 to 74 compared to younger cohorts aged 16 to 24. And this is in line with the systematic review, which found that older adults may be more likely to experience reduced functional dependency and fewer depressive symptoms than younger cohorts. And the life course analysis also shows that the association between volunteering and well-being did not emerge until individuals reach 40 years and continue up to old age. Now, one possible explanation for this is that older volunteers may just simply have more time to engage in these volunteer activities. And the longer time that they engage, the greater positive impacts that they receive from the engagement. But then other studies have also suggested that the benefits could already be seen even with very small amounts of time, small amounts of volunteering, and that's spending too much time volunteering that it became another work commitment, could have adverse effects on health and well-being. However, the age differences shown here may also be explained by a cohort effect, especially the social meaning of volunteering has been changed and redefined constantly across years. Now, volunteerism has a very long history, which can be dated back to the medieval times, when the churches were responsible to help and look after the sick and the poor. And the development of volunteerism continued to grow during the World Wars and boomed in 1960s, when the number of volunteers and third sector communities increased significantly. And since then, volunteerism appeared to carry different social roles in later years. Now, for example, in the 1960s, the British government used volunteering as a way to support welfare services, address community problems, and tackle youth disaffections. And then 20 years later, in the 1980s, the focus on volunteering had been shifted to respond to mass unemployment. And governments used the volunteer as a way to provide community services training and job creation schemes for the unemployed. Now, with decreases in unemployment and a growing government interest in active citizenship in the 1990s, volunteering was perceived as a tool to combat social exclusion and pursue this idea of community and enhance social capital. And now entering the 2000s, there has been a surge in promoting health and well-being through volunteering, which has also been included in the social prescribing schemes, which is a schemes where patients can refer themselves or through doctor to local community to help improve their social, mental, physical well-being in the UK. Now, given that people's behaviors could be influenced by social structures and changes, it is plausible that the way volunteering is delivered and promoted could affect our engagement in volunteering and also the associated outcomes. And so we would like to use this opportunity to examine the relationship between volunteering and well-being through the lens of cohort effects by splitting the samples into different cohorts. But of course, apart from the social context of where we live, physical contexts such as area deprivation, safety, transport link can also influence our engagement in voluntary work. Now, for example, studies have shown that people were more likely to volunteer if they live in safer neighborhoods, and if the neighborhoods have strong sense of community connectedness and with more communities, amenities, and facilities. Now, these characteristics may be less likely to be found in deprived areas. Now, research has proved that and shown that in England, there is evidence that volunteering tended to be lower in deprived areas, which may be caused by a lack of voluntary associations in more deprived areas, and such unequal distribution in the engagement could potentially influence the well-being, the volunteer and well-being associations. And so the current study was designed to explore how changes in volunteering was related to the changes in mental distress and health-related quality of life over 10 years, and to understand how the association may vary across cohorts and across levels of area deprivation. Now, we use data from the Understanding Society waves 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10, where the volunteer engagement was measured. And then we merge the data with the LSOA's geodata, which provides information on levels of area deprivations. So we started with the sample of the Understanding Society with around 50,000 participants, and we only focus on those who provided data across measures. And also, we only look at those with valid longitudinal weight provided by the by Understanding Society. So we have roughly around 4.7 observations per person. Now, the full sample was stratified into 4 generations: the pre-1945, those who were born before 1945, baby boomers, so those who were born between 1945 and 1964, Generation X, people who were born between 1965 and 1979, and the Millennials, those who were born in 1980s or after. So to measure the volunteering, we used the questions asking how often participants had given an unpaid help or worked as a volunteer for any type of local, national, or international organizations of charity in the last 12 months. And then we collapsed the measures into engaged versus not engaged. And then we used the measures of GHQ-12 to measure mental distress and SF-12 to measure health-related quality. So face-to-face analysis were used for our analysis, which automatically controlled for all time invariant variables and important observed time-changing variables. We then built the model sequentially, where the first model was unadjusted. We then controlled for socio-demographic variables such as age, partnership status, and employment status. And finally, we included a binary variable of area deprivation. So the area deprivation, we coded as 20% most deprived areas versus the rest of the areas. We then performed an interaction term analysis interacting between volunteering and the IMD. So here is to give you an overlook of the sample characteristics. What we have found is that in the sample, 21% of them had volunteered. Older cohorts volunteered more. And interestingly, younger cohorts experienced greater mental distress, but better health-related quality of life. And in general, volunteers experience less mental distress, but better quality of life. And these differences were more prominent for older adults and more deprived neighborhoods. Mental distress and quality of life were worse in more deprived areas for both volunteers and non-volunteers. So when using the fictive analysis and after controlling for all time invariant variables and demographics and area deprivation, we found that volunteering was associated with lower levels of mental distress for the baby boomers generations. Now, the negative association was also seen for those who were born before the 1945, although it was weaker after controlling for time-changing variables. We didn't find any associations when examining the full sample and also for the Generation X and the Millennials. And for health-related quality of life, we found that volunteering engagement was associated with improvements in quality of life across 10 years. And notably, the positive associations were found for the pre-1945 and the baby boomers generations, and also when we look at the whole sample. And there was also some indication that volunteering engagement improved quality of life amongst the millennials, but the association was weakened after controlling for time-changing variables. Now, while as previous studies have shown that volunteering engagement rates are generally higher in safer, more accessible, and less deprived neighborhoods, we found that where people live does not really influence the association between volunteering and the outcomes. But of course, there are other potential explanations for this, for why we're not finding the interactions here. So first explanation is that it is possible that there might just be simply a small neighborhood effect on the likelihood of volunteering once individual characteristics have been accounted for. And the second explanation for this is that there may be small main effects of area deprivation on people's mental health and well-being. But nonetheless, our findings suggest that volunteering could potentially have benefits for all individuals if it can be introduced to different areas equally. Now we have done a set of sensitivity analysis to test the robustness of our study. So first of them is that we control for only age. And then we also, instead of looking at whether or not people engage or not engaged, we also redefined the measurements for volunteering to at least once a month versus less. We also tested different specifications for IMD to test the interaction terms. So we have tested the 10% most deprived areas where we generated binary variable, which is 10% versus 90% of the areas. We also tested the interaction terms with the IMD rank, treating it as a continuous variable. And we have also tested individually with each of these 7 IMD domains. And the results were very, very similar. So overall, our findings are very much in line with previous research, which has shown the benefits of volunteering on mental health. But we also found that these benefits may be stronger amongst older adults when compared to younger volunteers. Now, this can be understood through the lens of age and cohorts. So age effects are found when changes in physical, social, mental, and behavioral experiences are linked to aging, but not really related to the birth cohort to which people belong. So previous research identified a number of key mechanisms to understand how the experience of volunteering improves mental health and well-being. And some of these mechanisms may be especially relevant for older adults. So to give you an example, for older people, volunteering may have offered them opportunities to build new connections with others as a way to compensate for the social network that they might have lost through their life transitions. For example, the retirement or family change. Volunteering may also help older adults, especially those who have retired or unemployed, to form new social roles and group identity, as well as providing a sense of structure in their lives if they engage regularly. But then in contrast, many of these key ingredients like personal development, relationships, identities that link volunteering to health and well-being for younger adults could be experienced through education, employment, and family responsibilities, which actually have also been reflected in our analysis when the association between volunteering and the outcomes was weakened after considering time-changing demographic and socioeconomic factors. And so the impacts of volunteering may be weakened for younger cohorts. Now, another theory for these findings could be explained by cohort effects, where the effects of volunteering on the outcomes varies based on birth years. So volunteerism is socially constructed, which has been used as a tool by the government to tackle social issues and promote sense of community. Now, the social meanings of volunteering, alongside with initiatives and programs that encourage the engagement, could potentially influence how people think about their volunteer work and also their voluntary behavior and the associated outcomes. And in addition to this, the changes in social and political context could also influence people engagement. For example, the introduction of 0 hours contracts and the lack of provision of secure social housing starting in the 1990s may have made it more challenging for adults in the younger generations to commit to volunteering in their neighborhoods because they only live within the neighborhoods for temporarily. And infrequent voluntary involvement may have weakened the benefits of engagement. But of course, it is also possible that what we have seen from our research is that there might be collective characteristics. So older people or people from older generations were characterized as committed and disciplined, who enjoy direct and in-person communications, as opposed to younger generations who grew up in a time when technology was advancing fast and they were more likely to be characterized as individualistic. And so as a result, it is possible that while older generations may involve in volunteering to support the society, younger generations may be engaging in volunteering for themselves to support their personal development. And different rationales for volunteering may influence the types of outcomes that they receive. So, while our study has a large sample size and used fixed effect analysis to effectively control for covariates and provides an alternative explanation to explain the associations, it has some limitations. So first of all, even though we use fixed effect analysis to look at the longitudinal relationships, the causal inferences were unable to establish. However, the findings of these studies are very much in line with the experimental study. While we examined and compared the associations between different birth cohorts, there may be a risk of selection bias where the analysis for older generations may only include those who survived, which means that people who were healthier physically and mentally, and therefore stronger well-being effects found amongst older volunteers. And this study was unable to disentangle the cohort effects from age effects, And so more advanced statistics analysis would need to be done in order to disentangle it. But it does provide additional perspective to understand why we're finding stronger effects of volunteer amongst older adults. And of course, it would be great and interesting to also look into the frequency of volunteering and the types of activities. And finally, we only look at in the neighborhoods, we only look at where people live instead of where they volunteered. So while people tend to volunteer within their neighborhood communities, it is also possible that people may travel to a different neighborhoods where more opportunities were provided. And where they volunteer may be more relevant to their well-being instead of where they live. So what have we really learned from the results? First is that we can continue to support the volunteering participation amongst older adults, which could then help achieve successful aging. However, while we found that the well-being benefits and volunteering are the same regardless of where they live, the unequal distribution of engagement may mean that only some people, usually those with high education and living in wealthy areas, experience these benefits, reproducing the health inequalities. And it has also been estimated that 20%, most deprived areas have around 63% fewer voluntary organizations than the least deprived areas. So we need to tackle the unequal distributions. And of course, to provide well-maintained organizations, sufficient public funding, offers wide-ranging volunteer activities. And also we can use this to empower young people to volunteer in order to promote as a means to sustain well-being and also as a way to shape, change and support their community. And, So there are two important policy implications. So the first one is that it's it can help with the very current levelling up agenda, where it aims to tackle social inequalities and strengthen community resilience through voluntary work. And also understanding how volunteering impacts different age groups will be important for the current public health initiatives, such as the social prescribing schemes, which can then be designed to be more targeted and to provide community-based activities for various populations. Thank you very much and hope you enjoy my presentation.